welcome back to the Masters of Modern podcast. I am your host with my co-host, Benjamin Bateman.
What's up, everybody? Big time salute to you. That's an action thing. Big time tie straight, and that's a nerds and suits thing. And a pinky out here to our nobles of House Modern. Big thanks to Andrew Kelso for sticking with us. We are excited to have you guys in there. To all of the nobles of House Modern, thank you for anybody who has ever supported that program. And for you, Andrew, it's fun to hang out with you in these shows that we do before the show, where we get to talk about the subject matter. So,
sneak deets. He gets it a week early. He would have been able.
This one today is a cool one. I'm pretty excited for today's episode. I think it's a really interesting concept, and it comes on the heels of pretty big stuff happening. But we'll get to that in a second. I was going to let you introduce the fact that we are the Masters of Modern podcast.
Oh, we did. So I've decided a while back that I want to just jumped right into the subject matter, and we can do shoutouts later, because for people just tuning to us on YouTube or other places, they don't need to hear about random shoutouts. They want to hear about what our takes are on the ban and restricted announcements, as well as the subject matter of the episode. So this Monday, which was the August 3rd, Wizards of the Coast, in an emergency ban announcement, announced 11 bannings all at once in formats ranging from standard to pioneer to historic to brawl. And I'm going to just read them off because that, I think, is the easiest one. In standard, Wilderness Reclamation, Growth Spiral, Teferi Time Raveler, and Cauldron Familiar were banned. In Pioneer, Inverter of Truth, Kethis the Hidden Hand, Walking Ballista, and Underworld Breach were banned. In Historic, Wilderness Reclamation and Teferi Time Raveler were both suspended. And in Brawl, Teferi Time Raveler is banned. I think we should just briefly talk, or just briefly or unbriefly discuss each of the different formats kind of individually, and then cards into it. And then the subject matter for the remainder of the episode is we are actually going to rank. So it ends up that a total of 22 cards have been banned since 2006. Since 2017, 20 of them have been banned, which I think is the most cards banned.
That's such a wild statistic. Yeah. That's so crazy to think that in the day of Stoneforge Mystic and Jace being banned, when we were like, oh my goodness, 2 cards with an emergency banning, this never happens. These cards have to be on an otherworldly level of power.
And this is in standard, right? This is specifically in standard. Because there are even more cards banned if you include every format. I don't even know the number off the top of my head. I can probably look it up at some point. But yes, it has been
crazy.
Wild. It's been wild.
It's obviously a difference in philosophy, and we're going to talk about that just a little bit kind of as we go through these initial bannings. Now, it's notable for us to point out that this is obviously, the show is called The Masters of Modern. We're talking initially about bannings that aren't in Modern, but thankfully, there were no Modern bannings this time. We do get Modern bannings periodically, and we will talk about them when they happen, though I do think this is a pretty major step for Wizards. There's a lot of wrongs that have been sort of righted here, and not everybody necessarily thinks so, but definitely a lot of stagnant formats that they decided to really throw a wrench and shatter the glass. Monkey wrench, glass shattering.
There's a lot of metaphors happening. There's a lot of metaphors. None of them are the same metaphor.
Have you ever thrown a wrench at a glass? No,
maybe. I'm very clumsy. People really shouldn't give me wrenches. You mentioned Modern. Like, one thing that is relevant is like always cards that are banned in standard and other formats, looking at their effects on Modern, which is what we're going to do as the second half of this episode, as well as just looking at the fact that, there's definitely one card on this list that I think has a chance to be banned in standard or in Modern within our lifetimes, but that's a ridiculous sentence. But soon we'll get that into in a second. But I do want to talk a little bit about just kind of each of the formats individually. And as a podcast, we talk about Pioneer, Historic, Brawl, and all these other formats as well. So it's not too much out of our wheelhouse. With standard, this definitely was like kind of the cause of, I think, the emergency ban. I think the other cards were banned because they realized they needed to ban those cards as well. But after the two very high there were two like Pro Tour opens, right, on over the last couple weekends, and just Wilderness Reclamation was above and beyond just dominant of the format. Growth Spiral has been behind a lot of extremely powerful decks to be around just throughout its existence in the format. Wizards has only like 3 months of this format existing, and I think realized that just like, let's get rid of these cards because Magic on Arena is so much more of a focus than it normally would be. People's paper collections aren't being really affected. Let's get past these cards. Teferi Time Raveler, honestly might be on a list of most unfun cards ever printed, or at least printed in the last 10 years. Oddly enough, this actual most unfun card being Oka was printed in the last year as well. So it's been wild. But that seems, and that we'll get into that a little bit more. And then Culture Familiar is an interesting one, right? That's the one that I think sticks out the most as like, oh, why? And a lot of people speculate, and in the announcement, they kind of explained that a chunk of it is, it's like, it is not a clean, efficient card on Arena. The amount of steps you have to click through to get that loop going is really inefficient versus Paper Magic. And so they banned it for two reasons. One, they think, every time they've been doing these big bannings, this red-black sacrifice engine deck always just kind of pops its head back at being one of the best decks in the format. And so they figured this could just be the best deck. If this is the best deck, this is a miserable deck to be the best deck, partially because of the interaction with this card and Arena. Someone asked, I have this list built up, so I can't really get to it. Someone did ask on Twitter, like, is this the first card to ever be banned in Standard or banned in general due to its interaction with just the digital client? And I think it might be. My answer, though, was this is not the first card in a high-profile way that has been banned due to its, like, interaction with rules. On a timeliness perspective, like eggs and top both being banned feel very similar.
Well, I think, the standard bannings, going through them and kind of looking at them, some of them make pure and clear sense, right? Teferi being banned, for instance, is a card that, like, they don't really want to ban cards that say Teferi. That's, like, not a thing that they want to do. Wizards is not happy about having to do that. There are a few flagship characters that are, like, really important to the brand. Teferi is one of those characters. It's like a Jace. And this card, obviously, they by making it rare, by not making it a mythic when they printed it, they just sort of undershot how effective it was going to be, I guess. Like they obviously looked at it and thought that it was going to be, because just generally speaking, they don't print things other than lands at rare that they don't expect to be a little less than the flashy mythics. Mythics should always be the card that they expect. This will be the card. No,
I don't agree with that. I don't think rarity is an issue here. I think what, like, I don't know how you didn't look at Reflector Mage and realize that this had to be banned in Standard. This was a dominant card in Modern. This is, based on a not Llanowar, right? Or not Llanowar. Manowar. Manowar, a card that at its first time being legal was also very dominant. And we're like, hey, why don't we make that card a Planeswalker and better?
I think like, okay, so again, I'm not saying that they undersold it. Like, they looked at it and were like, there's no way this will be a problem. It was a Teferi. They wanted to push a Teferi. Mm-hmm. But I'm saying I think that this card so vastly exceeded what they expected in terms of its impact. And I actually think the minus ability is very powerful, but it's actually just having something in play that doesn't allow your opponents to play things at instant speed that cost you 3 mana, that, like, if they're not set up in the turn following the time you play it to get rid of it, based on what you're doing, the rest of the game will be miserable. Like, it's just going to be unfun. And it doesn't matter if it's in Standard or Modern or Historic. It doesn't matter what format it's in. It's always the same play experience against it. It's horrible.
Right. It's a very unfun card. And that's some of the comments online as well, right? That, like, not only does Teferi and Culture Familiar weren't really banned for power level reasons, right? Teferi wasn't dominating Standard or these other formats, but what it was doing was making every game where it showed up miserable. And so this was a card that was banned partially just due to funness, right? It was making Magic worse by existing.
And I think you can trace, you mentioned 2 cards being banned pre-2016 and then 20 cards being banned since. And I think you can trace Wizards of the Coast being trying to be very active in their ear to the ground on the community and making sure that the format is righted since then. I think that's kind of what they've done, which is why the bannings have been so aggressive. Yes, they've pushed the power level. We saw what happened with War of the Spark and Modern Horizons. I mean, that's all real, but it's also a level of, like, social media in the last 5 years has become, like, the main form of communication for everybody. So, like, anybody who's on Twitter or the company, like, it's so much more impossible to ignore when there's a card that people feel like is a problem.
But this is,
and I think,
sorry, continue.
To finish my thought, I just think so. I think the fun factor and the expansion factor that, like, Hasbro is really pushing, which is, like, we need to get more people involved in playing our game because there now every year are more competitors than ever making interesting and fun games. So if the audience is telling us this is not as good as we want it to be, this is boring, this sucks, this isn't a good format, they're much more prone to ban things now than I think years ago when Twitter was not as active and there were a lot less TCGs to compete with.
Yeah, I think this is kind of one of the comments, right? It is Magic has this unique flaw as a esport or as a digital client, digital card game, because if something's broken, they can't change it, right? In Hearthstone, if a card is too powerful, they'll make it cost one more crystal, or they'll like
buff it or they
buff it or nerf it. In Magic, you can't do that because it's a paper printed thing and it's out there in the world and you're just stuck with it. So they have to figure out how to deal with that as a dilemma. And banning is one of the ways to do it. I think also just the digital client experience. There's so many more games of Standard being played on a moment to moment basis, like on an hourly basis, not even daily basis, that formats get solved a lot more quicker, right? Like people can figure out, oh, this is the best strategy. This is actually what needs to be happening. And so a lot of people have talked about maybe increasing Standards rotation again, right? Bringing back what they were doing right after Cons Block, which is like there were 2 rotations a year, so it was a faster rotation. Now that everything is on Arena, you end up in an environment where maybe that's a better option, because with Arena rotating, it's more about continued play. That way, cards get out a little bit quicker if they're problematic. I also think London Mulligan deserves a lot of blame that I don't think it's getting from people. I think it makes more games of Magic happen. So I think on a net basis, it's a positive, but I don't think things were being balanced in respect to the London Mulligan happening at the same time. And so just like, especially in Pioneer is a good example, which I think we need to get to next. Just like combo heaven, right? Like literally they realized that Inverted Truth was too powerful. It was too powerful. It was like, it was dominating the format in a way that almost was killing Pioneer, to the extent that we would argue that it was killing Pioneer. And then they're like, well, but if we get rid of this, here's 3 other cards that are just going to replace it as the de facto go-to combo strategy, right? You either have Heliod combo, you have Kethis-based combo decks, or you have Underworld Breach decks, and all 3 of these one of these will become the next best combo, because one of the problems Pioneer has is its interaction is significantly worse than Modern, but its power level is getting close to the combo level of it. So they just were like, you know what? Just nuke it.
Let's get rid of all the combos.
Every combo that is currently seeing competitive play, get out of here.
It'll be interesting to see, we've talked a bit about how Pioneer has been kind of dying, and how we feel like it's been on the downswing. These bannings, we will see if this kind of reinvigorates the format for people. Obviously, it's not a time to reinvigorate anything in Paper Magic. There's not going to be an immediate testing ground for these bannings, which is really tough.
No. I mean, this is, if you go to our episode, we didn't even mention the metagame, right? Like the that was maybe a fault of the episode, but when we were talking about Pioneer is facing problems and is dying or is dead, it had nothing to do with the metagame at the time, though the metagame was influencing the environment. It was much more focused on extra metagame based things, right? The world at large, the way the launches happen, the process of bannings, etc. It's competition with digital product. And so then add the layer of the metagame. Now, the metagame could be much more fun. And if we start hearing, Pioneer is the best it's ever been, then maybe people start going to it. But we're still in all those other reasons that we said haven't gone away. So I'm a little suspect of it still. That being said, it having a fun metagame is the best thing to possibly give it a chance of surviving this moment. And then a reinvigorated push once we can play Magic again in person.
Before we move on from Standard, just really quickly, and we're going to talk about these cards when we get to our ranking, but I do want to just quickly touch on Wilderness Wreck and Growth Spiral, because I think those 2 cards together and what had been happening in Standard for a little while, Growth Spiral was a card that I think when it was printed, we both knew was going to be good. We put it, we both responded to it. Wilderness Wreck was not really a card that we responded to when we previewed it. It makes sense that in a format like Standard, when you think about it, that Wilderness Wreck is going to be as good as it turned out to be. Obviously cards like Shark Typhoon being printed make it even better, but it's sort of this idea now that in, vintage and older formats, like the ability to play really cheap counterspells to invalidate you playing things that cost 4 and 5 and 6. It's a really good barometer for players to look at and be like, oh yeah, if it's sorcery speed and it costs 4, 5, or 6, it's probably not that good because my stuff's more efficient and cheaper. Standard doesn't have that. So when you print things that are really, really good, that give you an enormous advantage that cost 4 or cost 5, it's kind of the same thing with Fires of Invention. Like, you can counter Fires of Invention. That's a thing you can do. It's the same thing you can counter Wilderness Wreck. But what happens is if you counter the 4-drop, they just play a Cavalier on 5. And then they have a big 5-drop creature. If you counter Wilderness Wreck, they're like, all right, well, I probably have already ramped out with a growth spiral, so I'm probably a turn early. So now I'm going to hit my 5th land, and I'll just, I don't know, I'll play something huge, or I'll wait one more turn and I'll play Shark Typhoon. And then if you don't counter it, the rest of the game is miserable for you. You're going to lose, and like, it's just like sort of the impact of bigger spells. And I think that that's something, the big spells have been pushed really hard. Like that's definitely a place the last few years Wizards is focused, is that if it costs 4 and it doesn't do something when it enters the battlefield, and Wilderness Wreck kind of does, but like if it doesn't immediately impact the board when it comes down and it costs 4 or more, they're aware of the fact that smart players are like, I'm not going to play that. So they're like, well, we have to make it that much better. We have to make the player who does it feel like they're really getting a payoff.
Well, Wilderness Reclamation is a ramp card that's free. Right? It costs 0 mana to play this card. You play it and then you untap all those lands. You have to have instant speed effects, right? It has to have things that can take advantage of having flash or be an instant, but otherwise it's a free card. Where and then from the turn next it ramps you. It is ostensibly the better half of Sword of Feast and Famine, and you don't have to connect with the Squadron Hawk. So
why is Growth Spiral so much better than Explore? What is the like? Is it just the fact that it's an instant speed card?
So I forget who wrote it. Someone wrote it. It was on SCG. I want to say it was Ari Lax, but it could have been Sam Black, and it could have been neither of them, and I could just be wrong. They wrote a really good analysis of just like green ramp and the differences between power levels and why it's been so powerful. Explore is borderline too good as it is. Like it has never really good, when it was in standard, it was one of the best cards in the format, even with Cobblade being around, right? Like Valakut decks were played until the format rotated, to the extent that Valakut was a card that was banned at the onset of Modern's creation. So like Explorer has always been an amazing card. Jokingly, it's Time Walk. And Growth Spiral is that card, plus it's an instant. So I think it's just like it's taking a card that's borderline too good for most formats. As a ramp card, or is always going to be the best ramp card you have in the or one of the best ramp cards you have in a format, if not the best ramp card, if maybe ramp isn't good enough in that format, and adding it to just being able to cast it on your opponent's turn, right? I think one of the truisms of Magic is if you give a spell flash, it's better 90% of the time, if not 99% of the time. Like the 1% are like,
and sometimes it's like outrageously better, right? So like for instance, Explorer is borderline too good, but it doesn't get played necessarily in a blue deck. Growth Spiral, you're going to play in a blue deck, which means you probably will have counter magic, which means you'll probably have things that are played at instant speed anyway, and there's really no downside. So like it turns a card that you were maybe going to play like red green, or like have to just like deal with the fact that maybe your opponents are going to counter your stuff, to like, no, you're not going to counter my stuff because I'll just counter yours, and if I don't counter yours, then I'll just play Explorer anyway.
I would love to see a world where Growth Spiral was Selesnya colored or Golgari colored, where
couldn't agree more. Like, I think the blue,
I think like because this is the thing with gold cards, right? Gold cards are always more powerful because being gold is a extra cost. If you are 2 colors, it is harder to cast that card than if you are 1 color, and so with that extra cost in mind, they're always going to be more powerful. They're always, or Wizards always feels like they can put more power onto them. And so because of that, but with Growth Spiral, the restriction they gave to Growth Spiral to make it an instant was make it gold, including blue, which is maybe the least restrictive color to have added. If you made it green-white, like now I have to play 3 colors if I want to play counter spells, or I have to pay like bad white removal that has flash. Like there's like 1 enchantment, I think, that was in the format at the same time as this card. So like it becomes a much more interesting card to me if it's in a bad color for flat. Like it's almost too good because it's in blue.
Yeah, but it also is interesting that they decided to take blue green and not just make blue green better, like we'll just make it okay. So like for instance, they printed Frilled Mystic, right? Which is like, okay, that's cool. Like that's like a probably significantly better Mystic Snake. Like I'm much happier to get a 3/2 than a 2/2 and pay the extra mana for it, like the extra colored mana. That's cool. You give me a little more power for it. There's like a lot of instant speed effects on the green evolve cards, like adapt, which is the one adapt. Yeah. There's a lot of value and power there, and it's very cool the way they're sort of building blue and green, but it's not just the instant speed thing. They just decided to make the combination of blue and green really strong at the same time they printed Growth Spiral. So like you would think they would have sort of gone into the flash Simic thing, but they also just gave us Oko and Uro and Hydroid Krasis, and they did all of it in the course of like a year or two. So now it's like, well, yeah, even if I don't play things at instant speed, if I just ramp in these two colors, my threats are nuts. Whatever I'm doing is insane. And even Keenan, like,
oh yeah, well, Keenan, Neoform, like the list of good blue-green cards of the last 2 years is laughable. But I think part of it is they were trying to, right? Like one of the literally when we did our top 10 blue-green episode the first time, it was this color combo has no identity and is bad. So I think they're looking at color identities and be like, how can we make these more stronger? They did it on the back of Ravnica, the return to 2-color sets. So that's even the moment that you want to look at that. They then went into multiple sets where blue-green is a feature for different reasons. But yeah, I think it's just like Growth Spiral was not a mistake. I think it's the line, right? The difference between Explore and Growth Spiral is the line between problematic and not problematic, and it's drawing a car. It's being instant speed on that. But yeah, I think that's been interesting. I mean, the last two formats I want to talk about, Brawl isn't a big one, and we can kind of curtail Brawl into the modern conversation, but Historic also is seeing Wilderness Reclamation and Teferi Time Raveler suspended. For those who don't know, the difference between suspended and banned is basically, from my understanding, suspended at this point means we will either ban this card or unban it by the next ban announcement that we have in a serious way, or by the next time a set comes out. They haven't been specific when that moment is, but basically the plan is to unban this card within a time period, or we will ban it. But the reason we're not making a decision yet is because they don't have to refund you wild cards until they do that decision. So your wild cards don't get returned on suspended cards. They only get returned on banned cards.
Though, interestingly enough, because Teferi Time Raveler was banned in Standard, if you were playing Time Raveler in Historic, you still get your cards back, even though it's suspended. Which is what happened. Yeah. I got my final 2 Ravelers the night before and was playing this really stupid deck with it that was trying to like bounce Wishclaw Talisman with Teferi to get anyway. And I woke up and I had 4 wild cards back. Yeah. So that was nice.
I do think that. So and then Teferi Time Raveler was banned in Brawl, and the funny thing about Brawl to me is that they can't banning commanders in that format, and Niv Mizzet is still around, and he's like by far the most miserable Brawl commander to play against, to the extent that I kind of stopped playing in queues. But that being said, I do think Teferi's one thing that this has showed me is that they weren't looking at Modern. Teferi's not too good at Modern right now, but I can see Teferi getting kicked out of Modern at some point in the future. I think it is just the same unfun issues as it has in these other formats. Modern has just had a huge refresh, so they're letting that kind of shake out first. But I can see if Blue-White eventually gets a moment in the sun in a way, and Teferi is a big piece of that, I think Teferi goes. I think the reason he's banned in most of these formats is a fun perspective ban. Yeah. Not a power level one necessarily, and Teferi is just as unfun in every other format it's legal in. The only formats it's not going to be unfun is ones that it doesn't see play.
Yeah, well, so we'll talk about Teferi a little bit more because, Teferi is on this list, the ranking we're going to do in a minute here. I do want to remind everybody here before we get into the full ranking on the episode to please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Hit that thumbs up button on the video because that definitely means a big thing. And one of the things we've not done in the past as much, but I really want to start doing is ask you guys to leave a comment. If you've watched the video, I'm serious, guys. If every single person who watches this leaves a comment that even just says like, hey, great episode. These episodes do so much better on the YouTube algorithm. They set the thing up to mean that interaction grows your channel. And so just if you're a fan of Masters of Modern, please leave a comment. It would mean the world to us. The last thing is we have a Patreon, patreon.com/the MMcast. There's a bunch of cool levels. We're actually going to be coming out with a brand new video very soon here, kind of explaining to you guys all the levels we're doing. But I do want to tell you guys that every single Monday, we've been playing Commander at 8:30, streaming live on the YouTube channel. I've been doing it. I've been having a great time doing it. It's been very fun. And one of the new levels we're trying to figure out is a way to involve you guys in that Commander game, whether it's suggesting the deck or it's maybe playing in the game. We have to figure it out together. But if you're a patron right now already, send us a message directly on Patreon. Let us know. Do you have a suggestion for that? I mean, is there something you would love to see as a patron? If you're not already a patron and you want to sign up and become a part of it, we're really excited about it. I've had a great time. We played competitive EDH. I had a great time doing that. So that's my spiel. Yeah, and we have some pretty sweet guests lined up for the next couple weeks. So we're really stoked. So Mondays, 8:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Or Pacific Daylight Time. I don't know how PDT and PSD works. Honestly, time is a construct.
but 8:30 in Los Angeles, 8:30 p.m. And it's been a blast. I've been really enjoying it. I'm excited. I think I'm going to play Geist next week, though it depends on what you're.
I've got like a new deck, right? Like, so I think Najeela is going to be done, and the reason I'm playing Najeela is because it allows me to play all of the free counter spells in Commander, which I'm like all of those free, like if you control a commander, this happens, and because it's a 5-color commander, I get 5 free spells, which I'm all about. So it's like a Kaikar Najeela deck.
Ben's been slowly just like building CDH decks. He like totally Thassa's Oracle comboed us all out last night, and it was fun. No, it was a good moment because we were going on long enough to die. But excuse me, it's been a blast. It's awesome. Definitely come hang out, and it's on my Twitter at Kess Wiley. Sorry, it's on my Twitch, Kess Wiley. You can follow me everywhere else at Kess Wiley. And then it's also being streamed to this YouTube channel. So just like and subscribe. You hit the bell,
please.
Get an alert. Comment on which commander deck you'd like us to play, or any commanders you want us to look at, and maybe build it. All right. So second half of the episode. Are you ready? We're ranking all 22 cards banned in Standard since Jason Stoneforth's Mystic.
and we're ranking these in Modern based on power level in Modern right now. That's how we did this. So it's basic. It's, it's like if I don't know, Jace the Mind Sculptor, for instance, which at one time was banned, and it was banned in Standard. How good is that in Modern today? Not at the time that it was banned.
I would say power level within the last year and a half. Because there's at least 2 cards on this list that are also banned in Modern. So
okay, yeah. So like when it was a thing.
Yeah. So those generally got high points. So don't worry. All right, starting at the bottom, number 22, Rogue Refiner.
It's blue, green, 1. I believe it's a 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, you create like 2 energy and draw a card. I think is the card. I'm pretty sure that's accurate. If it's not that, it's off barely, and it doesn't matter because this is a card that was just banned for Standard because the energy deck in Standard was good, and like, it's probably comparable maybe by half to like a Kitchen Finks in terms of the advantage you get. It's like a little worse. It doesn't do enough things. It's not recursive, and it costs 3, and it's sorcery speed. Drawing a card is great, but like, this is just a product of its environment. This is a 0 in Modern. Nobody ever played Modern unless they were playing it.
This was a deck where they just needed to get rid of energy, and they got rid of every good version of an energy card, and this is one of them. Our bottom 2 cards are, and I'm just going to talk about number 2. And before we get into this, I do want to explain how we rank this. I listed every one of these cards. Ben and me both gave our secret ranking for each of them, and then we totaled those out and then ranked them amongst ourselves, and we got with a pure ranking. So these are very definitive. There's no arguing about it. If you have an opinion about it, you can comment it. We might read it. We might not. Who knows? Because this is the correct ranking of these cards. So don't try.
This is the forever ranking. These are the decisions of the MMcast.
Attune with Aether, number 21. This is for 1 green. You can search your deck for any basic land, and it makes 2 energy. Right? That's the whole thing. 2 energy.
I think it makes 3 energy.
No, I'm looking at it. You get 2 energy.
It's 2. Okay.
Yeah, and they're looking at it right there.
Yeah, so again, this is the same thing, right? It's like, and this card honestly is more defensible, I think, than Rogue Refiner, just because Rogue Refiner, you have to make a clear decision to play a 3-drop, which is like, even in a deck that wants to, get its energy to do a big combo, you're still playing just like the 3-drop creature that draws you a card. This card is like the kind of thing that like most decks would just play, and the fact that it gets you advantage while also fixing your mana is what makes it a little better, but still, energy was not pushed quite to the level that it belonged in Modern, which is why I think it just ends up pretty low on the list for me.
Which is good, because it's not. I think Attune with Aether is the card that if energy is ever a thing in Modern, this card will be included, right? It's a powerful effect that is only going to be good if the mechanic it's based around is good, and until that happens, it won't see play. The next card, I want to make sure I didn't touch anything wrong. The next card on our list, number 20, is Ramanap Ruins. This is the 1 red land.
Yeah, this it creates colorless. You can add 1 red and lose a life, and it basically has the damage aspect. It's not that different from like the old threshold red land that you could sacrifice to deal 2. It has kind of a similar feeling to it. And it's very good in a Standard format where like the opportunity cost of playing this card is very, very low. It's just a land. You don't care about your life total. It gets you red, and then eventually your lands can deal damage, which is a really good thing. I think there's probably a world where this sees like play in the right modern deck. If there's like an angle where your lands going to the graveyard or having more of them in the graveyard is good in a burn deck, I could see it getting better, but it's not pushed that it's going to make those red decks in modern good enough. So it's pretty low for me.
Yeah, I think it's like, it's very powerful, right? Like this is a card that could swing and be a much higher card at any moment. Just if we ever get Desert Tribal in any format, maybe it becomes better. Right. Personally, I would love for Desert Mana to exist. I think it's too late for that, but for like there to be 5 desert basics, like the kind of snow mana, but with a different flavor to it.
Oh, that would be awesome. Why didn't they do that? That makes so much sense.
I don't know. Because snow is either terrible or too good, I guess. But yeah, it would be sweet. I would have loved it. They didn't. Instead, we got like Desert Tribal, which is cool among itself. But yeah, I really want like Desert Islands and Desert Forests. Desert Forest is the weird one. I guess it's an oasis, right?
That sounds like really dope, actually. But the problem is if they do that, then they can't retroactively go back and like make the old deserts that work that way. I guess they could.
They just made Oubliette totally do a different thing. It does the same thing, but it's like a different thing.
There's like an aspect to the desert thing that I think actually is a missed opportunity because like very much in the same way that like when you watch Empire Strikes Back, you're like, oh my God, we're on the snow planet. This is so cool and memorable. Snow lands, desert lands, like that type of thing that a young kid plays and like remembers very well. Mm-hmm. That actually does feel like a distinctly missed opportunity.
There's also like a cool flavor perspective where like Nicol Bolas comes from Dominaria, I believe. And it's like a world where that's where snow happened, right? That's where the snowlands are. But then if he like originated or like his plane that he remade has like desert versions of that is sweet. I think there's like a lot of Dominaria connection there that would have been cool as well. But we didn't get that. Missed opportunity. Desert land should produce desert mana. I think it won't happen due to Astrolab and how desert or snow-covered lands have affected due to Modern Horizons, but missed opportunity for sure. Next card, number 19, probably the card that I wanted to be unbanned more. Not I didn't want to, but like was the silliest for its existence on the ban list for as long as it was Rampaging Ferocidon, a card that pretty much was just created to fight against countercat decks once they realized that they had made the mistake. Yep, it's a menace. Players can't gain life 3/3. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, Rampaging Ferocidon deals 1 damage to that creature's controller. So it's just like a very aggressive 3-drop threat. It got banned at a time when like Ramanant Red was too good and just red decks in general had way too much power level. This is actually one of the cards in this era is one of the reasons that they've Fire was created. The concept of like why so many powerful cards have been printed is because for like a 3-year period, just mono red decks were better than everything else you did, just because from pound to pound, if nothing is powerful, red's gonna kind of just creep to the top. And this card was banned out of that deck along with Ramanant Ruins, which is just like the worst word.
Probably top of the list. I would say for silliest standard bannings, not because I think that necessarily standard would have been better if they hadn't been banned, but looking back, like we've named all of the cards so far basically that represent that, like these are silly cards that were banned out of standard. This card in particular though, if you showed me this card, like I do not play this card in a Highlander wheel of 600 cards. This is a card that was banned in standard. In fact, I don't play a single one of the cards so far that we've talked about. Maybe Ramanant. It's possible I play it because lands
that's like an easy add. There's minimal cost. Here's the thing with Rampaging Ferocidon. When it was banned, fine with the decision. It was a card that they kind of even admitted themselves. This was pushed to solve a problem that we had to ban, and now it's the invasive species problem. Do you know the story of cane toads in Australia?
No.
Oh, okay. So cane toads are this frog.
This is the hot take, by the way, Marshall.
Cane toads are this frog that is poisonous, but it eats this type of not bacteria. I think it's a parasite that was like rampaging around Australia, and they're like, oh, well, let's get these cane toads. They'll eat this thing that's hurting our crops. They bring the cane toad in to kind of do it. It kind of ends up there's no predator for it there because it's poisonous. So there's nothing that can kill it. So it ends up and they like breed super quick, so it ends up consuming the country. So there's these, and it was brought in as a problem to solve this other problem. That problem went away, and then they had this new problem that was so much worse. And that's kind of what Rampaging Ferocidon was at the time of its release, where they built it to be this tuned weapon to fight against going infinite with Countercat, because they thought that Saheeli plus Felidar Sarvin was going to be too powerful and was not going to be something they'd ban, but just on the edge of too powerful. Ends up they banned it, so then this card comes out and is not the right answer. But at that time, then just mono red decks were the best thing on the planet. And so they're like, okay, let's ban it. But then standard rotates and it's just like red becomes trash. This card doesn't even compare to the power level of other cards in the format, which include like Dominaria. And so they're just like, it just never got taken off the ban list until the very, very last second, out of just momentum.
I feel like probably this card should have cost red 3, should have been a 1/4, had the same ability, and should have said, if a player has gained life since your last turn, this card costs 1 less to cast. Literally, that's it. And then it would have been simple. It would have been like, okay, this is a sweet blocker. It's an anti-life gain card. It's not that aggressive. No problem. No one will ever play this card except as maybe a sideboard card in standard. And then it's the same cost naturally as Felidar Guardian. It has the same stats basically. But that wasn't the case. And whatever. We have a silly card to look back on. What's next?
4 mana. Legendary artifact, Aetherworks Marvel. Whenever a permanent you control is put into a graveyard, you get a energy. You may tap it and pay 6 energy. Look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may cast a card from among them without paying its mana cost. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. This is low, kind of sadly. This would be a really cool card. People always are trying to make energy work. And there's a lot of cards below this card that would be better if this was playable in Modern, right? Like, this was the payoff for energy. This was the most powerful thing you could doing. It's snuck Emrakul's into play. It's snuck other really powerful threats into play. And it's just not powerful enough. Like, it's like a 4 mana that wins the game, but you have to do so much work with bad cards that in Modern, there's just good cards you can play that win you the game. It was kind of like the argument between Arclight Phoenix and Vengevine when Arclight Phoenix came out, right? Like, Vengevine was at that point kind of not considered the best card. Now it randomly comes back. But part of that is you just have to play with bad cards to get Vengevine to work. You have to play with self-mill cards that are creatures. Arclight Phoenix, you have to play with spells that are all already good. So that card just is that much better. And Aetherworks Marvel is kind of the reverse of that. We're just like, Rogue Refiner and Attune with Aether aren't good enough for Modern. They just aren't. And to be able to play this card, you have to play with those cards, which means that you're doing a lot of work to sneak a big thing into play. And like Tron lands exist and like other things that can ramp.
I think in Standard, looking back at this card, why it was banned, it's like they basically designed a standard format where like, okay, so here's the best cards that you can play to get you energy. And this is the big payoff that will win you the game. But the rest of Standard is not designed at the time so that if you're playing all of those cards, there are obvious decks that will be better than those cards. Like, they just didn't design it correctly because like this was just the best deck. Like, it was just clearly you were playing pretty reasonable effects. Like, Attune with Aether gets you land. Rogue Refiner is a pretty decent 3-drop. For Standard power levels, that all makes sense. The problem was knowing that they had only designed a certain number of energy cards, and this was the thing you were building towards. The rest of Standard wasn't designed to beat it. And that was just a mistake on their part. And it's not, Modern's too big to fall victim to that, but Standard's pretty narrow.
And so it had a little bit of the birthing pot issue, right? Where like every cool threat they printed made Aetherworks Marvel better. Just because like, oh, I can't cheat Emrakul, you banned it, but let's cheat in this other big threat that you printed. This next set has this other cool thing I can put in with Aetherworks Marvel. It also had like the artifact set matters problem that they have where it's just like, the colors you needed, you can kind of play whatever you wanted because between this being colorless and the main payoffs being colorless and Attune with Aether getting any color you needed, it was really easy. This is another card that like literally multiple cards needed to be banned before they banned this. Like, they banned Attune with Aether, they banned Emrakul, so they banned cards before they eventually got to Aetherworks Marvel, and finally just like, you know what, this card's the problem. And kind of the same reason that Attune with Aether and Rogue Refiner being on this list is kind of funny because those cards aren't very powerful. They were banned as lead-ups to Aetherworks Marvel being banned because they were trying to keep this card a engine card in the format while getting rid of other ones. I'm quickly going to do this to my camera because that seems to change my camera so it focuses on me to an extent. Yep, better.
Yep, you look good. Yeah, I think Marvel is a pretty good example of a card that is just, it's the pinnacle of a new mechanic pushed in a Standard format that couldn't handle that mechanic. And it's not going to make an impact in Modern because we're not going to get any more energy cards. If we go back to more energy, maybe, but not for now.
I don't think we will. I think it like is relatively considered a mistake in how they used it. Maybe they do. Maybe they think they can do a better job, but it seems like a mechanic that they like won't go back to. Agent of Treachery is the next card. This card is the first card that was banned in recent times.
2 mana, 2 blue and 5. It's a 2/3 correct me if I'm wrong, it's like a human wizard. When it enters the battlefield, gain control of human rogue, sick. Gain control of target permanent. It's not until end of turn, so it's a permanent gain control of target permanent. Yeah. And I think it's you draw 3 cards of what happens?
So yeah, it's you gain control permanently. You don't it's not until this creature leaves. And then at the beginning of your end step, if you control 3 or more permanents you don't own, draw 3 cards. So it was funny. So right before it got banned, up to that point, I had played with the card a few different times and played against it, and only the mind control effect mattered, right? It just was the best reanimating threat. You got to steal one thing, and so I had only ever really read that part, and the second half I just ignored or forgot existed. And then at the very end, when the clone decks were kind of dealing with it, so you were copying it and playing what was the companion Garuda? To kind of get multiple copies of it into play, and then you started just very easily triggering the draw 3 cards. I was like, this is insane. Why does this have ancestral visions attached to the back end? Yeah, this card's sweet. I think it's just worse than other cards you can be cheating, because this card essentially does not cost 7, right? The 7 mana cost on this card basically it could be 20 mana for all intents and purposes.
There's a lot of reasons too, right? It's the fact that it costs. There's the fact that it has 2 power and it costs 7 mana, which is pretty rare that you get something so expensive that is so little in its stats, because a lot of things that reference reanimation effects in various formats will reference the power of a creature or the toughness of a creature or something like that. So your ability to get this thing back in various formats is quite easy. The fact that it's it's 1 color means that ramping into it is relatively easy. It's just. Yeah, it's not a card that is necessarily you're casting a 7 mana 2/3.
Right.
And it's also, you realize pretty quickly playing against it, if they can cheat this into play even one time early, taking my land and then ramping into the next Agent of Treachery when I'm down a land and they've taken my land is so deflating. Mm-hmm. That's why this card is good. I think it's the first card on our list that feels to me like it's just right there at Modern. This will be in Modern lists, but definitely not ever at risk of being banned.
Yeah, I definitely can see this card jumping up and just becoming one of the better cards on this list. Even the fact that a Winota deck can just become good in Modern, right? Winota has all of the trappings of a card that is good, and this is the best human to cheat in with Winota. From the big human, there's conversations of more value oriented humans, and that's a different conversation. But yeah, Agent of Treachery is just a very sweet card.
Again, it's not a card that I don't play this card currently in any Highlander decks, but I think that I could see it. I could see building around it. Having a deck that services it. It's powerful. It's a very powerful effect.
Yeah. Next card, and this is I think where these 2 cards ranked amongst each other are really the only controversial things that I would say we have, or the most controversial decision so far. And as I said, it's a very strict rule system that we follow to rank these cards. Many scientists are involved. Cauldron Familiar. This is 1 black for a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Unless it's all opponents lose 1 life and you gain 1 life. But and then you may, if it is in your graveyard, you may sacrifice a food token to return it into play. This famously combos with Witch's Oven, which you can sacrifice a creature to make a food token, so it's a loop between the 2 of them, allowing you to have an infinite blocker that then gains you life and does damage to them every turn. And if you get multiple Witch's Ovens, you can start draining them for multiple things a turn. Banned for most people's perspective due to its kind of a pain in the ass on digital clients, which is the majority of Magic right now. So they just got rid of it partially for that reason. I also think that it is actually a pretty oppressive mechanic. I think that this is a card that would there has been a top tier Aristocrats deck in Standard since this card was printed, and it always is the 4th best deck in the format, and they just banned 3 other decks, and they maybe were worried that it would just be the best deck, and I think they were kind of nuking the earth at this moment and getting rid of every powerful strategy to some extent, and are just sick of them missing bans, right? They didn't ban Reclamation, and the world kind of mocked them for it, and I think they're maybe sick of it. Got rid of this card.
So a couple things. Aristocrats, for anybody who's listening or watching that doesn't know what that is, it's a famous style of deck that comes from around 6 or 7 years ago, where basically you're triggering whenever things die, you're gaining life, opponents are losing life. I think Cartel Aristocrat is the main card that it's based on.
It was Innistrad Return to Ravnica standard. You had Cartel Aristocrat, and you had the flying black red 2-drop Aristocrat.
It was black red. I'm not sure, but basically, yeah. I mean, it's in reference to that mechanic.
There was the white black sacrifice a creature, gain protection from a color, and that was an aristocrat. And then you had the Innistrad Vampire that was a 4/1 flyer.
Sure. Falcon Wrath
Aristocrat. Yeah, so it's Cartel Aristocrat and Falcon Wrath Aristocrat, and just a bunch of very powerful token generators that let you sacrifice them, gain value with those cards, but also use them for other reasons and other damaging, and damage prevention effects. And so since that deck was, and that deck, I think top 2 to Pro Tour. I think Sam Black was playing it.
I thought it was Tom Martell. Maybe not.
Maybe it was Tom Martell. Everyone's Sam Black. He's very good at Magic. And so that deck established kind of the aristocrat style, but it's a sacrifice themed deck where when you sacrifice stuff, you do damage. That deck was also playing Blood Artist, which allows you to drain when you sacrifice creatures. Normally that's something that's there as well. And it's a pretty fan favorite deck. People really love playing it. And it's been really cool how good it has been for the last year. Just Cauldron Familiar, I think, is more of a like miserable for Moto or miserable for Arena problem.
I was going to say, I think for Modern, the reason this makes it a little higher on the list for us, because there's a world where this is the worst card on the entire list. Like it's a pretty innocuous card. You have to have 2 cards to even get like this very, very piddly engine going. But I think the reason that it makes it a little higher for me is that the combo card that it goes with is colorless, which means that these 2 cards fit into any shell where you want to base it around black, or even splash black, really. Modern's support system to get the cards you want is so much greater. It's so much easier to get the things you want. And there are so many more triggers when things die. You mentioned all the cards we just talked about. I mean, imagine if that standard deck with the cards we mentioned just got to play this combo, and then also had all of the other things printed since then. You talk about that, like the tutor, where it's like you search your deck for a black card equal to the number of black things in your graveyard. That just for 1 mana instant speed gets you the cat. Like there are so many things that have been printed since this. I feel like that make me feel like an Aristocrats deck based around this could easily just be incredibly dominant. But I think it's a little higher for me.
Yeah, the Cat and Elven are just so cheap, right? They're so mana efficient. They're both card types that are also like pretty easy to find on as far as like looking for cards. Like there's like everything from Trinket Mage to other things that find 1-drops. And they trigger, like the mechanic triggers a lot of things. Witch's Oven is also good with a lot of cards. It's a very good sack outlet. It's like very good at racing against burn decks too, because you can start gaining life off the food you're sacrificing. And just the fact that it's a cat, I think, is also something that is important to bring up. Like Cat Tribal is a thing, and this is one of the best things to do in Cat Tribal, right? Like this is one of the best, most powerful cats. And the fact that you can play 4 1-drop cats that then any cat lord you play after that, and they are printing more of those every day.
Horizon's 3-drop cat is like really good. That card's a great 3-drop lord. Like +2/+1 is insane. Right. That makes all of your piddly, oven token witch cats 3/1s. Like that's really good.
Right. And you have even Kahira. So I think from that perspective, like this is the card that gives one of the cards that gives Cat Tribal something different that's worth going after and doing that like humans needed and spirits needed and merfolk needed and goblins now needed to go over the top and be a actual tribal strategy in Modern. You need to do something like merfolk are all unblockables because islands exist and they have mana destruction. Spirits is just a deck of flash threats that all are counter spells. Every single card in that deck is a counter spell.
Yeah, it's disruptive. I think this gets an angle that none of the other tribal decks get, and I do think that there is. I don't think it's too good now, but I think the fact that you have 2 1-drops that can essentially fit into any deck makes it the kind of thing that I could just see breaking out where we ranked it a little higher.
Yeah.
So the next controversial card
is. Well, those are the 2 controversials, right? Like the Cauldron Familiar versus Agent of Treachery. It's possible Agent of Treachery is like top 10 on this list, and Cauldron Familiar is the worst card.
It's like a non-thing. Okay, gotcha.
The next card, you ranked lower than I did with a 2. I give it a 6, which is fascinating because you love this card. It is Smuggler's Copter. This is a 2-mana vehicle for, I think, equip 1, or not equip.
It's crew 1. It's a 3/3. Whenever it attacks or blocks, draw 1 and discard 1. And I don't know what the actual creature type of the 3/3 copter is. It's a rogue copter, maybe?
No, it's
like,
just a vehicle.
Or it's just a vehicle.
Vehicles don't have creature types. I don't think.
Don't have creature types, yeah. So this card, the reason that it's so low for me is that I feel like, so it's been how many years since this card was printed now? Like 4, something like that? 5? I mean, it's been legal in Modern the entire time. There are certain cards this card is insane with. Like, obviously, with Grand Architect, it's really good. That's like one of the better cards you can play with it. The fact that Architect on turn 3 casts it itself, then can crew it the next turn, then make it a 4/4 flyer. Like, there's a deck right there. You just build on your own. It's very good. And I at one point, I believed that Copter was going to be the thing that made Architect the truth. Like, I believed it fully. There are other things you can do with Copter. I mean, in obviously Highlander, in Commander, I've played it with Sig, Dirty Sig. I think it's really good with Sig. Like, playing obviously Copter and crewing it with Sig, attacking for 3, drawing, discarding, triggering the draw end of turn, holding open a 1-mana counterspell. Like, this card really does fit nicely into that tempo shell. But all that being said, 5 years later, it's never seen a lick of play in Modern. More than like a deck or two. And it's just, it's such an obviously good thing with the things I'm talking about that, like, I love the power level. It's just never, ever, ever even had the slightest moment.
Yeah, maybe it's just like too fair. But I don't know. This is a card that I can see once again kind of coming back on top. It does a lot of really powerful things that I can see it being good enough. But yeah, maybe this one I rated a little too highly. I can see me lowering my rating on this one. Okay.
There's nothing I'd rather see than this card being good.
Same. That's, I think, why I rated it as high as I did. I want it to be good. And I think you rated it lower than you would have from the opposite perspective, that you want it to be so good and it hasn't been for you. And therefore you're mad at it.
It's not been so not good. It's been actively bad. Sure. Like, I've tried it. It's like, it does absolutely nothing in Modern. So, like, it's just hard.
It's so fascinating to me that, like, I think it's Lightning Bolt to me, almost, because in Modern it's unplayable, but in Pioneer they had to ban it again, right? So that's the line. Is that, like, what is different between those two formats that's so great that this is not so good in one and so powerful in the other? And
actually, can we just like talk for a quick second? So Architect costs 3. Like, that's too much for this card, even though I love casting it. But Sig, play 4 Sig, play 4 of this thing. You can play a black build or a blue build and pair it with like Lightning Bolt and other things, probably like blue-red, and then Sig as just like the thing that crews it. And now every turn you have a draw, discard, deal 3, draw 1. You have burn and counter spells. As long as you have a few other things to support it, that seems like, how could that not be good? Like, that's so cheap.
For 4 mana, you draw. On turn 3, you tap out to draw 2, discard 1, and do 3 damage?
No. You play Copter turn 2. Mm-hmm. Turn 3, you play Sig. Sig can tap immediately to crew the Copter. You have 1 open for Spell Pierce or whatever other counterspell you want.
So yeah, you need 1 mana. Yeah, okay. You need a lot of 1 mana interaction.
Easy though, right? Not to mention the fact that, like, you can just, like, if you wanted to play a 1-drop like a Curse Catcher or the bird, to like make sure you have that extra piece of interaction in case they try to kill something on turn 1. Those things also crew the Copter, so you don't really care. The whole deck is kind of built around Copter at that point, which, like, whatever. But again, like, if you want to play Flying Lords and play, say, like Storm Tamer maybe instead, like, where you're just like all 1/1 flying for 1, Copter, Sig, and then like things that make your flyers better. I don't know. Like, I have a hard time imagining that's not actually a thing you could do in Modern that's good. I don't know. I think my like limitation on it is that Stoneforge Mystic does a lot of the work you just described, and you only need 1 card to kind of combo with it. Fair. Now, all 3 of those cards together is maybe a conversation as well. So who knows? I'm going to move on. We do want to go a little quicker through each card, especially because we're getting closer to cards that, like, I think people will remember. But the next card is Emrakul the Promise End. This is number 14 on our list. She is a 13 mana 13 Eldrazi legendary creature. Has flying, trample, protection from instants. Emrakul the Promised End costs 1 less to cast for each card type among cards in your graveyard, and then when you cast Emrakul, you gain control of target opponent during that player's next turn. After that turn, that player takes an extra turn. So,
This card often just wins the game by casting it, not as thoroughly as Emrakul the Aeon's Torn. Banned in Standard, partially because of Aetherworks Marvel, but even before that, it was kind of just dominated. Famously, the top 2 decks of the Pro Tour were Emrakul the Promised End fighting a deck that was playing Liliana the Last Hope, which was the story moment for the Shadows over Innistrad block storyline. And this card's just kind of nuts when you play it. You get to mind control your person's entire turn, and then they get another turn, but at that point you put them so far behind that it doesn't matter, and you have a flying trample protection from instance 13/13 that they are going to have a hard time dealing with. They have top deck and answer to do it.
The thing about this card is that it activates when you cast it. So the only way to actually get this thing to be good is you have to ramp out with a Tron deck, and you have to make sure that it resolves. And actually, it's when you cast it, you get the next turn. So it doesn't even have to resolve. You just have to cast it. There's not that many things in Modern you're casting for 8 or 9 or 10 or 11 that you are resolving. There's a few, but there's not that many. There's giant things often get reanimated, or Karn or Ugin resolves, 7 drops, 8 drops.
Right. This sees play in Tron, right? That's the deck that plays this deck normally as a 1 of, and maybe a 2 of, but one of them is in the sideboard at most, and sometimes and more often even just 1 in the sideboard, not even 1 in the main deck.
Yeah.
Because there are decks that just straight up lose to this if you get to 4 mana, right? You can play this on turn 4, right? That's the quickest Tron can get it into play. Because you have 7, then 10, and by 10 you can get Artifact.
Yeah, I think turn 4 is real. I think if you compare this to old effects in Tron decks that were doing something similar, like Mindslaver Lock, it's easier to ramp out into this than that, and it's better. If you do this one time, you probably win. It just feels like it is a little bit extra in terms of hoops you're jumping through. The reason I put it high enough for it to beat the cards we talked about is just because I feel like it's an easier to cast Haymaker effect that is colorless. So it means that beyond even what people are doing now with it, it could show up in other versions of Tron decks or other versions of ramp decks.
Well, I've seen
it could get there.
I've seen it in sideboards for Jund before, right? There's weird places to put it. The fact that this could, in a very grindy game, be 8 mana less, if you're playing the right cards. So and Jund decks are already trying to take advantage of Delirium in different ways sometimes. So if you're playing with one, a Tarfire, right, and a Courser of Crufix or something like that, you can get to the enchantment and tribal part that's normally missing and get this to being an 8/9 or an 8 mana, right? There's 13 minus 8, so that's a 5 mana card with a lot of work, but scaling 5 to 8 mana in a Jund deck that can't get that high. And if you cast this and you're in a grindy matchup, the chances of you losing are low. Especially
that's why I think that's why when going over the top of this card is appealing. It's just I can't see that in any sideboard being more than a 1 or a 2 of, or even in Tron, maybe being this is the specific Tron deck that makes this a 1 or 2 of, which is it's really powerful. So it deserves a higher spot. But the fact that it's the fringe card, even in the decks it's good in, means it's not going to make the top 10. So that's my thought on
it. The next card is Nexus of Fate, number 13. 7 mana, take an extra turn. If this card would go into your graveyard, shuffle it into your library instead. I believe that's
the reason this card is so high, strictly for me, and this is not a card I have almost ever cast in my life.
But you've lost.
I've played against it. I have. I hate your guts. Look, this is a time walk style card that gets around a lot of the problems that getting comboed out has. And honestly, this card in itself is just all I need to do is get to casting this basically and have this in my deck, and I won't lose. It wasn't a big deal when it was printed. We talked about it, but it wasn't this Modern, is unfair and stupid. Yeah. And it became very unfair and stupid very fast. Which means that the fact that it has that 7 CMC on it is one of the things that people roll their eyes at. But it's if unchecked, it's just a very dumb card. And I think that's what Modern is. It's kind of unchecked. So this could be a dumb card in Modern.
The fact that this is an instant is what makes the card, right? We talked about with Growth Spiral earlier in the podcast about how that that affects the playability of a card in such a significant way. 7 mana is a lot of mana. 7 mana at instant speed is a lot less mana, because you can cast this at the end of your opponent's turn. on turn 7, after you've ramped a few times and you have it in your backyard. The other card that this obviously does very well with is Wilderness Reclamation, which is why those cards just like shouldn't be legal in formats together, which we'll get to in a second. But this card is definitely like just this like interesting control finisher that a lot of decks can take advantage of. It's good in ramp strategies as well, because it kind of does what Growth Spiral does, right? For this amount of mana, you get to put an extra land into play and draw a card and untap. So yeah, it's like very powerful. And the fact that it interacts with your graveyard in the way it does is like a win condition on its own, right? You can never deck yourself if you have a Nexus of Fate in your deck. And so it's easy for you to play control decks that are just like, I am going to answer every one of your threats and draw as many cards as possible. And you're never going to I'm going to lock you out of the game with control strategies. And then eventually I'm just going to have Nexus of Fate as the last card of my deck. And you will eventually lose because I'm just taking extra turns and keeping you from being able to do anything and winning with my small advantage.
It's a frustrating card to realize for anybody who's listening or watching that doesn't quite understand this, because I didn't get this at first. Like I didn't read it because it was the 7 mana extra turn. Nexus of Fate. It is the nexus of your fate. You will lose if this is my last card. I will cast this every single turn and you'll never play again. You can't lose. If this is your last card and they can't find a way to exile it or something like that, you'll cast it, it'll go to your graveyard, it'll reshuffle, it'll be the last card in your deck, you'll draw it, you'll cast it again, you'll never lose.
Well,
that's what the card is.
Turns and you never lose, right? Like it prevents death.
and that's like what is so fascinating about the card is that like it's a unique effect. There's very few of those that have ever been printed that if you can support that in a certain way, and Modern has enough things to support cards like this. That's why this is so high, not because people have played this and like crushed a Modern Pro Tour or something. It's because like eventually someone will. They'll make the deck around this card that just wins, and like everyone will be like, oh man, well, Nexus of Fate is the reason that deck is a tier 1 deck. Without Nexus of Fate, it's like a tier 3 deck, but because of that card, it's a tier 1 deck and it's a top tier deck. That'll happen eventually, guaranteed.
The next card is Wilderness Reclamation. Speaking of ways to go big with Nexus of Fate, this is a 2 green enchantment. Let me bring it
up. Isn't it green 3?
I think you're right. It is 3 and a green enchantment. All at the beginning of your end step, untap all lands you control. We talked about this earlier in the podcast. I don't think we have to get too farther into it, other than the fact that there are just more instant speed X spells and good effects that you can cast to win the game with this. But basically, this is like people were jumping through a lot of hoops to get Sword and Feast and Famine to work. This card is just Sword and Feast and Famine without any effort. You don't need a thing to attack. You don't need to equip equipment to a threat that can be killed by a removal spell. You just can play this enchantment, and now it's free and taps all your lands. You now get to counter any magic spells you would like to counter on your opponent's turn. And then from that point on, you can either at the end of your turn cast a spell that is equal to twice the mana you could produce with your lands, or you can cast something on your turn, then untap, and then on your opponent's turn, hold counter magic up. So it just does a lot. It makes a lot of mana.
I mean, basically think about it like this. If you guys have ever played a new game that isn't Magic and has limited cards, there's a few cards you can play. There's always going to be the odd thing you do that it's not the popular one. It's a little weirder. And it's like take advantage of this weird thing that people don't exactly have a lot of ways to interact with. Well, those are enchantments. So you play this card. Then you untap. So now you have 8 mana instead of 4 mana. So now your resources that every game has have been doubled. You're way ahead on things. They have a hard time interacting with the thing, and you have twice the resources. But it's not standard. It's not a new game that's been around for a year. It's a game that has cards that are legal back the last 17 years. So now you have access to every single card printed for the last 17 years that could take advantage of doubling your resources with the hardest to interact with style of card that is printed. And that's what you're dealing with Wilderness Rec, which is why this card is so high for us, because eventually someone is going to come up with the deck that makes Wilderness Rec get banned in Modern. It'll just happen. It's hard to imagine it won't. Enchantments are pretty difficult to deal with.
Every instant speed effect over 6 mana it's kind of the birthing pod problem. It's the second time this has come up. Every 6 mana effect that they print that is an instant speed effect for now on is breakable with Wilderness Reclamation.
Right.
Like even this year, right? Discontinuity, Nexus of Fate, the counter spell that like is command on crack, right? The like 17 ability command from M20.
Right. I mean, I think that's kind of my point, is that like it's not, this one is pretty easy to figure out. Like they have come up with a way to just like sort of break the resource management pool of Magic. It's not overtly powerful on its surface because it's just like a 4 mana enchantment, but if unchecked, this is just totally breaks the way cards are designed. And yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, for 4 mana for free, you get to cast a 10 mana spell on your next turn. And then another 12 mana spell on your next turn, unless you have another one of these enchantments, which then it's a 18 mana spell on your next turn.
They stack. Right. Like Sphinx's Rev, the turn you cast this. Literally just like the turn you cast this. I'll play my 4-drop, and then I'll just, gain 5, draw 5 on turn 4.
The next turn. It's the next turn. You would cast. Because you, on this turn.
Sure. Because you only get
4 mana. You get 4. You play this, and then you Cryptic Command, and then on your next turn, you Sphinx's Rev for 6.
Yeah.
Or 7? So yes. Next card, and actually I made a mistake. I apologize, chat. There are mistakes that happen. That was number 11. Number 12, which is right before it, and I accidentally skipped it, is Fires of Invention. 3 in a red enchantment. You can cast spells only during your turn, and you can cast no more than 2 spells each turn. You may cast spells with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of lands you control without paying their mana cost. So another free spell. Like it's
this one's a little weirder.
They are.
This one's a little weirder because if you cast this spell, let's say you ramp into it and you cast it on turn 4, but you have 5 lands because of like a growth spiral or like an explore effect. So like, okay, so you cast it, that's your first spell of the turn. So now you play, some 5-drop. In standard they were Cavaliers, but say what? Planeswalker, whatever, Baneslayer, Angel of Dragon, some big thing that costs 5 that's very good, and if it's unchecked, they'll probably win the game. And that's very good. Like it just hinges on the ability of your opponent to interact with another 4-drop enchantment. It's like very much like Wilderness Wreck. It's kind of like, if unchecked, this will do better things than any other deck. There's no tempo deck or control deck that's going to deal with what you're doing. The deck
that I've played I've played modern decks that play this deck, and the deck that seems to take the best advantage of it is just Time Walks deck, right? Like you play this, and then you play a Time Walk.
Savor the moment.
Then you untap, and you play 2 more Time Walks. Then you untap, and you play more Time Walks. And then at that point, you're just like burying your opponent in turns that then lets you play Uro and other powerful effects. So it's like interaction with the fact that Modern has like enough efficiently costed Time Walks, including the 3 mana one that's broken with this.
Savor the moment.
The moment.
Blue 1 sorcery. Take an extra turn out of this one. Skip your untap step.
But this you don't untap. Like your lands no longer matter, so untapping doesn't matter. So it's just like really powerful with this. So
I think if this card similar to what you described with Growth Spiral. So if this card had cost 5 and had been red 3 for the same thing. It would have been you cast this for 5, and then it just goes directly into a 5 time twister. The other one, extra turn for 5, classic, whatever it is. But sure. I can't think of the name of it. But yeah, I mean this would have just been like, say what?
Time Warp.
Time Warp, yes.
Yeah.
You would have cast this, and then parallel to the mana you spent, you would have cast the Time Warp, and then like you would have had to do more. But turn 5 is a little later. The fact that it's turn 4. It's just a little pushed. It's good for standard and fun for standard to have a card like this because your options are lower.
I mean,
but as soon as this cycles, as soon as this like recycles into a format like Modern, it just gets awkward. I don't really expect that this card will ever be insane in Modern. Like I think it's really powerful. I think it could get pushed and have a good deck behind it. I don't think it'll be broken unless the extra turns deck takes off and becomes like a tier 1 deck.
I don't know.
But I could be wrong. But I think it definitely pushes what we're able to do.
I think these 2 cards and the next card are my like at any moment this could just be the best deck in Modern section. They're not. They haven't been before, but at any moment, just with the right card printed or the right metagame, this is just the best card. And these 3 cards. And this one is probably the closest, and maybe even Nexus of Fate. So, and like Emrakul, like all of these cards have like different ways that like, oh, maybe this is the best card. I think Emrakul is the like just misses and is kind of a sideboard card. The Nexus of Fate, Fires of Invention, and Wilderness Reclamation were all like, oh, at any moment, this could be a card that's too problematic for Modern for it to exist. The next card, which I think is also in that category, is Felidar Guardian. Felidar Guardian is 3 and a white for a 1/4 Cat Beast. When Felidar Guardian enters the battlefield, you may exile another target permanent you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. This is a little bit different because I don't think it ever can break it, right? I think Wilderness Reclamation and Fires of Invention like could go from being a tier 2 deck to a tier 0 deck overnight. I think this card is doing what it will always do, though eventually they might print a combo with it that is just as powerful as this, more powerful than the Saheeli Felidar Guardian combo, and then it's too good.
So where I think this is interesting is that right now, at its mana cost, Felidar Guardian is one of the only cards ever printed that does exactly what it does. It blinks a permanent instantly. So it means you can tap it, cast it for 4, and then have an untapped land the same turn right away. And that's very good. It's very cool. Obviously, with Saheeli, one of my favorite cards of all time, those two cards together are phenomenal. Just like they printed Thassa's Oracle with Lab Maniac already existing, they could come up with some twist on Felidar Guardian for Standard that doesn't affect Standard that is better than this card, because on its surface, like, just a 1/4 for 4 that does this is pretty boring. It like doesn't have much going for it. It's not a rare or a mythic that does like a cool thing. Like they could have some huge drawback flash 2/1 flyer for 3 that does it or something. Like there's a lot of things they could come up with, make the card worse. But I think that it's unique enough now that there are plenty of things they could print that would push this over the top, because the efficiency of blinking a permanent means there are a million different permanents, lands, accelerants that when they come down.
Yep. Sorry.
Yeah, it's just a very unique effect. And like one thing to always pay attention to when you're trying to figure out the power level of Magic cards, and also to some level the sort of like the value spectrum of Magic cards, is how many things do this. When things get printed that are new, that are cool, and you're trying to evaluate, like, is this going to be worth money? Is this unique? Has anything ever done this before? Is there anything like this? And Guardian is one of the only cards ever like it. So I believe this card could be good tomorrow. It just depends what they print.
Yeah, it's to me, there's like two features to it, right? It's a card that gains a ton of value that also can win you the game the moment you cast it. And anytime a card can do those two things on one card, it's like a card that should always be respected. The fact that I can cast this and like blink everything from a Blade Splicer to a Kitchen Finks to whatever, but then also if Saheeli or Kiki Jiki are in a play, just win. Just like outright, right. You lose, goodbye. And there's they could print more effects. Like they like playing in that space, so I can see other effects that, because Felidar Guardian is unique in that it is a blink effect on any permanent, they could print an enchantment that does something weird that makes it so this wins the game. They can print another Planeswalker. It won't break Standard, but in Modern, it could just be like, oh, we printed Saheeli, the card, like another Planeswalker that like minuses to make a clone, but it's like plus is good.
They could also have some card that was like, whenever a creature with power 1 or less enters the battlefield, like
copy it.
I don't know, like or like bounce a permanent or like some shenanigans. Sure. That's like just like some like wonky 1-drop or 2-drop enchantment that you're like, oh, what is this card? Like, oh, I'll play this, and now my Guardian on its own, blinking my land, also like blinks your land, and like that's insane. There's like lots of things. Yeah. I don't know, like it could be very good. So I think everybody has talked about it. We've talked about it on here plenty.
It's a cat also. Next card, also a good card to blink with Felidar Guardian. I think you've done this in a GP. It is a 1 blue and a white 2/3. And it is Reflector Mage. When it enters the battlefield, return a creature to target opponent's hand, or creature to its owner's hand, and then
I believe it's that target
opponent to their hand, and they cannot cast that spell on their next turn. We were talking about Teferi. This card, I don't know how Teferi was printed when this card was banned in Standard. This card was dominated in Standard, Modern playable. It's a human, so humans plays it to this day. It's one of the better blue-white control cards. It was way more widely played until Teferi was printed. I think this is stayed as highly rated as it is purely because humans can play it and they can't really play Teferi, and that's like saving it at the top, but added to the effect that like it does have some more blink shenanigans that it can do. It can play with stuff that can bring blink creatures, so more Death and Taxi Z decks. It can be hit with Collected Company, and just you get like so much value, and you're able to control your opponent from stopping them from doing something almost as well as Teferi. Now, I think Teferi outclasses this card almost every other way, but I also believe that Teferi is a card that could be banned, and then that moment happens, Reflector Mage is just like right back on top. Also stuff like Restoration Angel with this card doesn't work with Teferi, right? You can't like abuse Teferi sometimes.
You can't blink, way. Yeah, right.
But otherwise, it's yeah. I don't know anything more I want to say about Reflector Mage. It's a really good card.
Yeah, Reflector Mage is like kind of a maddening card to play against. I think it being a 2/3 with Human Lords is kind of a problem. I think if this card had been a 2/1, it would have been like a lot more kind of the tempo vibe you wanted out of the card, to be honest. Like a 3-mana 2/1 with the exact same effect still is playable in the same deck and does a lot of the same things. It's just a lot easier to kill. It sticks around a little less, and its butt is a little harder to get, is a little easier to get through. Because like with a human lord, this being a 3/4 is just like an incredibly frustrating thing to play against. It's very good. Like 3/4 is a big size. Like that's does damage, blocks most things type of card.
It's also a wizard. Just I forgot to mention that. Just another tribe that can be eventually relevant.
It's not overtly powerful. It's kind of like there's a class of 3-drop like Kitchen Finks that just fits into this category. And it's just like they're just good cards. When you play against them, you're like, oh, man, you got so much out of your 3 mana there. Like it's a really good class of Magic card that they designed, which is like it's definitely pushed for its mana cost, and it's just a pain in the ass when your opponent plays it. And that's what this card is, and it will always be. I don't think it should ever be banned in Modern. It's not good enough to be banned in Modern. It's just really good.
And where I'm kind of out on Reflector Mage, and versus Teferi, right, is Reflector Mage was classically unfun in Standard. Like people did not like this card. This is a card people did not like. And Teferi is just not a strictly better version. We've talked about the small ways that it's better, but a better version than this card, right? It does the thing, and then you draw a card. They can cast that card again, but they can't cast it at instant speed, and you can cast spells at instant speed, so you're probably going to counter it.
Well, we will talk about Teferi in a moment here, so let's keep rolling down the list.
Growth Spiral is next. We did talk about it at the beginning of the podcast, the number 8. We are in the top 10. So Felidar Guardian was number 10. Reflector Mage is number 9. Growth Spiral is number 8. The card's really good. Instant Speed Explorers insane.
We had a full discussion about it earlier. I think just like the thing about this card is that it will fit into many, many Modern decks from here on out, and it won't get banned in Modern until there's a specific reason that the deck it's in just gets that much slower without it, and so it can be banned. But like that's what's going to happen. It'll just have to be like the deck that is so good by slowing it down by a turn could be worse, and that will mean Growth Spiral's gone. That's kind of it, because otherwise it's just Modern is pretty comparable at this power level. There's lots of things that are this good.
Yeah, I think this card's great in Modern. I actually love this card in Modern. I would never want it to be banned in Modern. I just think it's very powerful there. I think it's like the same reason I've always argued like Preordain could be unbanned. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I think it probably creates too many easy win combo decks than the format needs. But like Growth Spiral has this perfect, I think it's perfect in the format. I think if this card ever is too good, Uro and Primeval Titan are way closer to being banned than this card is, and like so I think it's going to be a staple of Modern forever. It's really sweet. It does everything you ever want a card to do without, and just like it's like the best. I think it is maybe the best card for Modern on this list. I love other cards more, but it's just like fine. The next card,
I think in Modern is phenomenal. Yeah, keep going.
The next card is Veil of Summer, a card that I have a different opinion on. This is number 7. It is 1 green mana and a bunch of text that I'm never going to remember all the words, so I'm going to look it up. Autumn's Veil, get out of here. Veil of Summer is 1 green, instant, draw a card. If an opponent has cast a blue or black spell this turn, spells you control can't be countered this turn. You and permanents you control gain hexproof from blue and from black until end of turn. So I think that the thing that always like I had the hardest time to kind of register was spells you control can't be countered this turn, and I realized that's because it's attached to blue, plus you getting hexproof, just like so many of the things. It just does so much. I honestly think it needs to be banned. I think it's in 60% of decks in Modern right now, which I think is too many. Get rid of Veil of Summer.
Yeah, honestly, like so it's 1 green, right? So the way you said it here, just to clarify, guys, it's draw a card if an opponent has cast a blue or black spell this turn. So when you read that part of the card as a new player, you're like, well, okay, I've learned my lesson. If they're not playing those cards, I can't main deck this card. Next part, spells you control can't be countered this turn. So now you're saying that in response to your counterspell, my 1 green is going to counter your counterspell and make my giant threat that I was trying to resolve, or my combo piece, resolve. And also, because the thing you cast was probably blue, I will also draw a card. So I'm playing 1 green, counter target spell, draw a card, which is kind of nuts. Blue doesn't get counter target spell, draw a card. It's never gotten that. If it did, it'd be way too good. It'd be my favorite card ever printed. And then you and permanents you control gain hexproof from blue and from black until end of turn. Once again, like that last piece is just like another green counterspell that draws you a card. If they're trying to kill your thing, you cast this and it counters the spell and draws a card. So on its surface, it reads very much like a flash freeze or a death mark, but you realize that all the extra text just means that they were like, we'll just draw a card to any version, to any version of the colors you're targeting at instant speed in a color that has the most powerful creatures. And that's the problem, is that like you should not be able to counter target spell, draw a card in the color that has the most powerful creatures without even touching blue. That's ridiculous.
I mean, this is kind of where I am at on Veil of Summer. It is the second it is now, before the ban announcement from 2 weeks ago, it was the most played card in the format. It is now the second most played card in the format. Number one is now Lightning Bolt, which I think is where Modern should be. Lightning Bolt being the most played card in the format is where Modern's happy place is. It is 30% of decks in the format are playing Veil of Summer. 26% of decks in the format are playing Aether Gust because it's good against Veil of Summer. So, like, I think that is not a sign to me of a healthy format. Which is why I, in general, would argue that the card is too powerful and probably should go. In the format.
I agree. I just think like this is a sign of like Wizards being like, we're going to push our cards to be just a little bit more reactive, and this turned out to be one of the examples where they're just a little too reactive. I don't think it's good for Magic to have these cards. I like looking at Flash Freeze and Deathmark and thinking about them in Celestial Purge and being like, oh, this is a fun 2 of in my sideboard. I don't like to think of them as like, I probably could main deck this.
Right.
This is probably good enough to just play against the field.
The next 2 cards are really peanut butter and jelly. Other 2 things, metaphors where they go together all the time. Were on the ban list together for a long time, have now both finally been reunited with each other. Stoneforge Mystic at number 6 and Jace the Mind Sculptor at number 5.
So I think to jump in here and just like sort of state my piece about these cards right to start is like, these cards when the format was started were banned because they had an idea of what the format was going to be, and they felt the power level of these 2 cards was above where that format power level was. By today's standard, these are the power level of Modern. They're not above it. They're not below it. They're really great cards. They're the kind of cards that when your opponents play them in a game, you're like, wow, your deck is just full of good cards. Like, you're playing the things you should be playing in this format. They're great. Like, it doesn't feel like Ponza. They haven't played some fun thing that's like taking advantage. They're not playing some shenanigans card in like, Hexproof or Infect where they're like taking advantage of the mechanic. They're just genuinely good, powerful cards that exist in the top echelon of the format, but they're not too good. I can beat you if you play Jace. I can beat a turn 2 Stoneforge. I don't even need Kolaghan's Command. It's just not that good. It's really good, but it's not way better than everything else I'm doing, which is why these cards to me feel like they're almost representative of exactly where Modern should be now in power level.
Yeah, I think these are both really cool. I love them. Stoneforge Mystic is one of my favorite cards of all time. Jace not as much, but I'm very happy that what it's been able to do for blue in the format. There was a while where people thought blue was bad in Modern, and Jace coming back has really kind of helped it in the format. Its ability to just, both of these cards I think are where I want Magic to be in internal formats. They're both fun. There's good answers to them. And I don't think like of the cards that are in the top 7, they're the only 2 that I'm like, yeah, I'm fine with these cards being legal. They're this high partially because they just have a proven track record. Like everything below them has a worse track record. Veil of Summer arguably could be higher, but like doesn't have the chops of some of these other cards is the word I'm going to use just historically, or like the obvious problematicness of maybe these other cards. Though Veil of Summer, I think I rated Veil of Summer was I ranked 1, 2, 3, 4 cards as 9s and 2 cards as 10s. So I had Veil of Summer pretty high, but just we both ranked Stoneforge Mystic and Jace highly. So those just cream the.
I think they're fair cards. Yeah. I like them where they're at. They don't feel too good. They feel just right.
Yep. Next card, number 4. Once Upon a Time.
So this one is like really interesting because you and I talked on the podcast about this card a lot, right? So it's 1 green, 1 colorless. It states that if this is in your opening hand, you may play this card without paying its mana cost. If it's the first spell you played this turn, I believe it's look at the top 5 cards of your library, put a creature or land into your hand from among them, and I believe it's an instant. So this card is like really good in a format that it supports it. Like it just makes your deck go faster. You fixes your draws combined with the London Mulligan. It's really good. I've always said that I think like drawing this later in the game is just a totally fine draw spell, but having the upside early on is amazing. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say
it's too good. Like it's just like you don't really want these effects in a format like this. Modern should still be a step lower than like Vintage and Legacy. Like it should still be one notch lower. And this effect consistently and just like an innocuous card that everyone's playing is much more of a Legacy effect than a Modern effect. So I think it's fine to have it out of the format.
We've mentioned this on the podcast before. Frank Karsten wrote a really good article that this just like lets you cut lands. This is ostensibly a land card in your deck and it allows you to kind of go for that. The fact that the London Mulligan made it so you can almost guarantee to have this in your opening hand and made every opening hand you had with the London Mulligan better because going down to 5, but the fifth card in that 5 is 5 cards deeper than you would have been able to see and is the best card of those 5 is extremely powerful. And then also I think the thing that late game that makes this card really good to draw is it's an instant. Right? Like on turn, if you've already cast spells, but on turn 3 you cast this and this is the spell you're going to cast, you can pass the turn untapped, bluff a counterspell, actually have the counterspell, and then at the end of their turn cast this, digging 5 cards in and finding the cards you need. So I think just like it's so efficient at every level. And free spells are a mistake. Cantrips are a mistake. Or card selection cantrips are generally too powerful and free spells are too powerful. And this is a free card selection cantrip. So I don't think it's surprising that this ended up being as good as it is. I think the fact that it was green was something that Wizards thought would get it out of the way. And like green cantrips are classically, this version are less played, but this one just put it over the top.
Green has been pushed so much the last few years, I think is why this got, and you don't need to play green for this card is the funny part. Right. Like you don't really need, you could just have a deck that discards the excess copies and just the early play is what's good.
And the templating on I think was really powerful. The fact that it's the first spell you cast each turn, so you technically don't have to cast this until turn 3 and it's still free, right? Like in Modern, I could play turn 1 tapped land, turn 2 untapped blue land, hold this open on my turn 3, right. Draw a card, play this then, get Reflector Mage or whatever, and play it that like, right? Like you can stack it so that like, if you're an interactive deck, you can wait until the very last second to play this card. Next card on our list is, and I think it's the card that, like, I think every card that we've talked about in some way deserves to be banned other than Stoneforge Mystic or Jace, which came off the ban list. Field of the Dead. This is a land that is also relatively intricate that I would like to read the exact wording on it.
Enters the battlefield tapped. It is colorless. It taps to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, if you control at least 6 other lands with different names than this land, you create a 2/2 zombie token and put it onto the battlefield. So it's kind of a scape shift card. It has like that. Once I have seven things, which plays very well, obviously with Growth Spiral. This is so high because this feels like this and Teferi are the 2 cards that will probably get banned in Modern at some point.
Like Veil of Summer, I think all 3 of those cards. Like
this card is kind of shenanigans. It being colorless is like a little bit of that's like the red herring, like that. It makes you think like, oh, in a land deck that wants to like play green to ramp, this card is not, but like who cares? Play this card as a half land slot, and it's still so good.
I think this land is fine. I think this land is still maybe too good, but is probably fine if it's legendary, right? One of the issues this card has is that you can have multiples and play at once, and so every additional one triggers it. The fact that it just needs the requirement to happen, and then it doesn't matter from that point on what land you play. Like, it's not like every time you play a land, if it's a different land, and you have this many different lands in play, make a zombie. It's landfall, make a zombie.
11, 12, 13, and 14 all to be unique. You just need to have 7 different ones, then every land triggers.
Which is like different than Valakut, right? Like, Valakut needs only mountains. If you play a non-mountain, no longer counts. Valakut doesn't like you anymore. And so that like puts a little bit more requirements on your mana base and how you play it. And also it's kind of the arguments, like when Ayula's Influence was previewed, we had a very long conversation of it versus Assault. And why making Seismic Assault and why making a 2/2 bear is more powerful than doing 3 damage or doing 2 damage to any target. And it ostensibly led to on a grindier matchup perspective, the bear is just a more valuable. You're drawing a card off of the bear versus the other card, which is only really good for combo potential. So Valakut's only really great when I'm like, I win, I killed you, and maybe in long grindy games, eventually I do 3 damage to you once a turn, but those are the worst case scenario, and 99% of the time, I Valakut, I win. With Field of the Dead, though, it's like, oh, I play a land. I have a zombie. Now I can block with that zombie. Next turn, I play another land. Now I have a zombie again, block again. Play Field of Dead number 2. I have 2 zombies. Play another land. 2 more. Like, eventually you just grind your opponent out in a way that's pretty miserable and extremely difficult to interact with.
I think Field of the Dead could have been either legendary or could have specified, if you control a card named Field of the Dead, create 1 zombie token, and it's the only zombie token you create this turn or something. There's some way to template it so that only one of them could trigger would have been like the thing. But like the fact that you can have multiples, they're non-legendary, they all trigger. So like fetch lands just go nuts is like just the thing that makes me feel like this will get banned. And that's why I put it so high.
Yep. Same.
Purely.
This is one of the 2 cards I gave a 10.
Yeah.
Really the next card is Teferi Time Raveler. We both gave it a 9.
I'll jump in first and just say that of the cards that are legal that are not the number 1 card, this is the number 1 card that I think will be banned, and it's just because like at one point Eric Whitehead's one of the founders of Highlander Gauntlet and I were talking about sort of most powerful mechanics. And one of the mechanics we talked about was split second. It was like, because it fundamentally invalidates the way you play Magic. That's like why, even though there weren't that many cards printed that had necessarily that mechanic that were that good, still the existence of the mechanic was like, I can't do the thing Magic is designed to have me do. I've like trained this way for 20 years and I can't do it. And like Teferi reminds you that the opportunity cost of playing it is so low. They've drawn a card. If they don't kill it right away, now the rest of the game, like, Magic doesn't function the same way. It's just kind of a boring, useless game. And I think that to me is like, it's not fun, but it's also so powerful for 3 mana, and it draws you a card. Who like my question is, if Teferi had 3 loyalty, not 4, same exact same thing. So it means to play it, you have to get rid of it to draw the card. Do you think the card would be anywhere near as good, or do you think it would be like whatever, like you get your effect but you're not going to draw a card, you have to plus it up to 4?
I think it's worse by a lot, but not enough to make it not miserable. The drawing a card isn't why it's miserable. I think it's a worse card, but I think that cutting off instant speed effects, which just turn half the cards off, making it so hard to fight, and the bounce effect on top of that makes it so that like the way you interact with a person just like is basically they can do everything and you get to do nothing, I think is what makes this card problematic. The card draw is almost just like tons of salt on the wound and makes Teferi much better on an empty board, right? If I like just play him, I can bounce my own thing for value. So like, yeah, I think that's where I'm at on the card. It's just, I think he's too good at making the game unfun. And I think that's also, I would say, of my like 3 cards that I can want to be banned or can see being banned, this is lowest for me. I think Field of the Dead and Veil of Summer are more likely to be banned first. But other than the fact that they just kind of did this big announcement that Teferi sucks,
right?
Yeah, because it just he's more unfun than necessarily good in Modern. There's like abrupt decays in Modern too, so there's just like better ways to kill him in the format. And just like from those perspectives, I think it's okay. Versus Field of the Dead and Veil of Summer, which like are interacting. Veil of Summer is an interesting card that's similar to Teferi, right? It's like you no longer get to play Magic, and I get to take advantage of it by drawing cards. Field of the Dead just is like also breaks Magic. Like all 3 of these cards are just like Magic no longer works.
I think if Teferi's printed with a 3 loyalty, like I said, and plussing Teferi is the move when you play him, usually because you don't want to lose him, it just means that instead of drawing a card, people will spend the next turn trying to deal with the 4 loyalty, and often they won't be able to. Sometimes they'll get it down, but that early in the game, often 4 loyalty will be too much, and then you'll draw a card the next turn, probably, or you'll respond and plus again, and it will just be a slightly more grindy, maybe like, I guess, slightly more fair, but just like so much more in your favor because of the non-instant speed thing that I actually think that even at 3, it would have been worse, but still probably dominant in the same way. I think like barely, like less, like probably more like on the level of, I don't know, like Narset maybe. Like maybe it would have been like the same level as Narset. Like really good, but not like just like a total pain in the ass.
Yeah, having to sacrifice it as a bounce spell the turn you cast it, I think does make it a lot worse, right? That's I think the where I would say it would have been.
But like even then, right? Like okay, so if you think about that card is like I'm going to spend 3 mana to bounce your permanent and draw a card because that's like what I have to do this turn. That's still pretty good.
Yeah,
like,
yeah. Oh no, it's definitely good. I'm not like all versions.
It's like basically like kind of recoil.
Yeah. Yeah,
like give or take, right? It's like give or take like a really good card from back in the day. But also
people play
if
like
you can
the
play
kicker,
it later.
bounce a permanent, draw a card if you kick it, right? Like that card's played in competitive formats, not in modern. Yeah, I don't know. I like we're also like talking about like how to make this card better or worse.
Yeah, sure.
Like the kind of the conversation gets to, I think Reflector Mage is borderline in some ways, right? And like it's much worse than this card. By like a lot. So like, yeah, I think that's where like similar to Growth Spiral and not Farseek. What's Growth Spiral without blue? Explore, Growth Spiral and blue. Like these two cards seem more powerful than those cards and comparable.
Well, we have, I believe, one card left.
Yes, and we are very far in this episode, so let's get to it. He has stolen some crowns. He's turned some people into an elk. He did heal Garrick. Garrick is no longer evil, either due to Oko directly or actions that he caused to put him into that position. It is Oko, Thief of Crowns. Actually, it's Oko's the Trickster. It's the 6-mana Oko. Most powerful card.
That's the one, yeah.
That's the one. But Oko, I have a rant about Oko Trickster, but we'll talk about that later. Oko Thief of Crowns, +2, create a food token for loyalty, +1, target artifact or creature loses all abilities and becomes a green elk creature with base power and toughness. Eat it 3/3. -5, exchange control of target artifact or creature you control and target creature and opponent controls with power 3 or less. This card single-handedly broke Magic for 3 months.
I feel like the card itself is one of the ultimate all-time examples of a card that, based on design, the designers and the immediate audience could not tell this was the level that it was when it was printed. We all thought it was. We all knew like, okay, this is a 3-mana planeswalker. It's pretty cool. This is pretty cool. But we didn't like all immediately go like, oh yeah, like this is like the stupidest, most unfun card that I've seen. We were all like, oh yeah, it's a 3-mana planeswalker. It's in blue-green. Blue-green is classically not that good. So let's see what happens. And then looking back, it's like, it doesn't matter what format this is in. This card is just like really, 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 really offensive. It's awful.
I mean, what was really interesting at the time, I don't know if our listeners remember, but you had to have back surgery like right around when Eldraine came out. So you went from paying attention to the Magic, and Oko was previewed. I think the set was fully previewed. Like you maybe even were able to like pay attention to the pre-release, and then
I missed the review though. I definitely missed the review.
You missed the review, and then you like weren't on the podcast for months, or for like a month. You didn't really talk about it. You weren't really thinking about Magic too much. You weren't paying attention to the format, and you come back and we like are doing a ranking of something, or I think, and then I'm just like Oko's, or you like have a conversation like what the best planeswalker of all time is. Like it's Oko, and you're like, no, that card can't be good. What, it makes a food token? And I'm like, no, it's broken Magic. This not only is this the best planeswalker ever printed, it could be on a short list of best card ever printed. Part of it is the elk token capability of like making a beast within. It's basically beast within every turn, right? That's like its base ability. Food tokens being artifacts, I think, was another thing that like people didn't expect as older formats you got into. The synergies that created was so beneficial. Like there are decks that literally look at like an artifact being in play just that does nothing is almost drawing a card. And so Oko drew them a card every turn. And then when it wasn't doing that, it was making it so any threat anyone played ever was no longer a threat. It was now a 3/3 elk that was pretty manageable to deal with. And then the fact that it was all pluses, so just like fighting an Oko was miserable because your creature was just a 3/3 and you are dealing like it comes into play. It's now at 5 loyalty. You have a 3/3, and from every turn that point on, your 3/3 is dealing against a 4/4 that's building and building. And in the meantime, they're stopping what you're doing. Beyond that, yeah, this card's just miserable.
What's hilarious about this card is that if you had made this card Oko Thief of Crowns, because it has no minus ability that's low cost. So if you could have made this card actually loyalty 2 when it came down. And if you had done that, it would have actually meant that +2 to create a food token makes it 4. Right. And then like another food tokens. Now you've got like pretty good advantage. Like I have 2 permanents. I'm going to gain life. The next turn I can gain control of things. Right. Or if I make it 2, like you could have made this card actually just 2 loyalty and it would have been fine. It wouldn't have been good, but it would have been fine. Because the +1 is actually like fine. If you play it mid game, often it's going to like make something good not good anymore. And then it becomes 3, and then like their 3 power thing can attack it directly to kill it if they want to. It's just it being 4 and plussing to go to 6 on turn 1 is just like I'll never deal with it. I have to have something so good to deal with this. Right. Otherwise, you already have won the game by playing this card.
Yep.
That's what it always feels like when I play against it.
And it's like people have had a lot of conversations like, how do you make this card fine? And people have like, make the +1 a -1. And like kind of the conversation be like, I don't think that actually works. I think that's still problematic. Making the +2 a +1, like all of the different knobs you could have twisted on it. And I think what's really interesting about it is it's like just glut of loyalty is an issue. But I think B, just like it's powerful in a way that nothing had been before. The like kind of the closest card I can think of is almost Sphinx's Revelation, right? Like it's just sustainability and card advantage. I like it. It's cool. I'm like Oko being so broken is cool to me because of how weird it is, right? No card has ever been powerful like this card. It's not like if they printed 1 red, do 4 damage to any target, right? Everyone will be like,
right, or like blue. Draw 4, right, sorcery,
right. Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh my god, the rate here is crazy. It's like,
and those
I looked at it and was like, yeah, this card's like a stupid 3-mana planeswalker. It's fine,
right.
Right. Like I looked at this card and was like, felt the way I felt about it that I felt about like Saheeli Ray, like maybe like +1, like oh, it's probably I could see this being really good, not like, but not that much more than like this card will be pretty cool. Whereas, like, I look at it now and I'm like, this is horrible. This should have had 1 loyalty. Like, this with 1 loyalty, it still would have probably been really good.
Yep. Agreed. Honestly, I think it should be like a 5-mana walker. Like, this card at 5 mana, I think is how you make it fair. Like, no other piece of word change. Just 5 mana for this. And I think the card is still a standard all-star.
Yeah.
So, So that is our ranking of every card banned in Standard since 2016. For all we know, this list is going to be outdated in 3 months. Uro is still out there, being legal. and
Uro's really good.
And I believe we have 1 more set at least until we start seeing the like reevaluation of the power level of Fire. If not 2, so both Battle for Zendikar Rising and whatever is following that set are going to be sets that we could be at high power levels as well. But other than that, thanks so much for everyone listening. Once again, check out our Patreon. It helps us make sure this podcast keeps happening. It literally is keeping it alive. Thank you, all of our patrons. Pinkies up to you. Thank you for all our subscribers and followers. We appreciate all the interaction we get from you in every episode. Thank you so much for watching. We're just like stoked every day that people like listening to us talk about Magic. Please, if you're watching this for the first time, like and subscribe. If you're not watching for the first time, but you're just a loyal MMcast fan and or weekly watcher, press that like button. It does help. Comment. I want to hear if you think any of our rankings were insane, that we should have had Oko at the worst card, that Veil of Summer doesn't need to be banned. I want to hear how you think I'm wrong. I live, I breathe off of that. And then make sure to follow us. I'm at Kes Wiley.
You guys can find me at Ben Bateman Media on Twitter or Instagram, and on Twitch, actually twitch.tv/Ben Bateman Streaming. I've been streaming a whole bunch of Historic recently. I climbed from like, gold all the way to, basically mythic, almost mythic this last week, and I'll be doing more of that this month. So go check out my Twitch.
Yep. And I'm Kess Wiley everywhere. So Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, KESSWYLIE on the internet is me everywhere, and I'd love to hang out. Yeah, and we do the stream for Commander on my Twitch and then on the YouTube channel, which you're here now, hopefully, or if you're listening to podcast, not there. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
This has been a production of Time Traveler Media, sending podcasts into the future.